Dad and a man named Price and a man named Eklund started making floor mats out of automobile tires.
No kidding.
And I was 10 years old on December 21st when I was out in the evening about 20 below zero, walking up Fairmont Avenue towards Lakewood when we came to Jackson's house.
Where was that now? What was his address?
Right there on Fairmont Avenue, just across from Chicago Avenue. The big pillars on it. And I rang the doorbell, and when the lights were on, naturally everybody says, Bob Jackson's home. That's the phrase around here. So maid came to the door, and she said, are you one of those kids from the school that's annoying us all the time, selling us tickets and so forth? No, I says, I want to see Mr. Jackson. It's a personal matter. What do you mean it's a personal matter? Well, I says, you tell him it's a personal matter. It's Louis E. Kelly out here. And I handed her my calling card. It said, Louis E. Kelly, salesman for the Wherever Mat Company. And so Bob Jackson was in the living room with his wife, Irene, and they heard me arguing with the maid. So finally he says, Helen, let the man in. She says, he's just a little boy. I said, no, Mr. Jackson, I'm a man, I'm a salesman. And at those days they had cocoa mats that made from the skin of a coconut, and the bugs would get in there in the spring and it would rot out by September. So I told them this was made out of automobile tires, and I told them the benefit of it. And when you stepped on it, any mud on your feet would go down through the seams. So he said, that looks like a good thing. And so finally, I measured the front yard, or front entrance, and it took a 36-inch mat for his front door and a 24-inch mat for the back door. And Mrs. Jackson says, well, now, Bob, we've got Christmas coming. It's December 21st, we've got Christmas coming. I said, Mrs. Jackson, that's why I'm here. They get money for Christmas. And so we started in, and he said, all right. He said, I'll take both, the 36. So I had to go across the street. My dad was selling on the other side of the street. And they came over. He got me the mats. I went in, and they were heavy. I was 10 years old, and I was a little boy. So I got him there, and he paid me, and I thanked him. I left. So then I went to Bob Jackson's house in the late spring when he was home on vacation from Washington. That was about the beginning of 1930, about the summer of 1933. And I showed him the polishing cloths. Boy, he went for those. He says, I can use this on my saddles. You know, the old saddles had a lot of brass and metal. And so I sold him a couple. And believe it or not, the next Christmas when he came back, he called my mother and said he wanted me to bring up a dozen more. So then the next summer, he called my mother and he says, I want him to come up to the Lakewood riding stables. And I went up there, and during the Depression days, there was a lot of these people around unemployed, you know, looking for a job. Anyone in government office, they'd just dive on them, you know, and have them see if they couldn't get you a job. So I got to the guardhouse there. They had it all fenced off because if Bob had a lot of notoriety in those days. People thought he was a great man. So they called up on the phone, and he says, that little Louis, he always called me little Louis. He says, if that's little Louis, send him up. And other people says, how can that little kid? One guy even says, that's a little snotty-nosed kid. How did he get in to see him? So I went up there, and he shook hands with me, gave me a big hug. And so I showed him the polishing cloths and sold him 2 dozen that time. Boy, 2 dozen. $6 a dozen? Wow. That's $12. I was rolling in the clover. So he says, you look like you're thirsty. So he bought me a Coke. They didn't have Pepsi or any of those other things in those days. He bought me a Coke and a hot dog. And so then, believe it or not, he said he admired me for my grit, the way I was arguing with the maid that day over not getting in the seam. And he says, I'll give you 4 letters to use in your life. And he says, you'll find out it'll work good. So he said, take the 4 Ds. You have to have desire to want to be something. You have to have the determination, come hell, fire, and high water. These are his words. Be determined. Then you have to be dedicated to your work. And then you have to be self-disciplined. So you have desire, determination, dedication, and discipline. That was 1933, and I still use those same four-letter words when I'm talking to young people today, telling about that. Right here up until Bob Jackson died. And then I had an appointment that day in Erie at the General Electric plant. But I went over, took care of the problem they had on the conveyor belts, got the problem solved, gave back, and just as I got back here, you had some men in the commandery that was honor guards. I wasn't able to be there, so I wasn't honor guard, but one man got sick. I don't know what happened, some type of a minor ailment. And so then I finally went up there and I helped out in the commandery there, the group there. So I was fairly close to the 8 justices. I don't think I was ever in somebody told me they took a movie of it or something, but I don't think I was there. But I cried like a baby. I just cried like a baby because he was a great man.